So how do you film an interview using only one camera? Maybe you're a run and gun filmmaker. Maybe you're a podcast on the go creator. Maybe you're a documentary filmmaker. There's lots of different ways that you can set up one camera and get a really good high quality looking interview, even if you're in a maximum hurry. I'm doing a multiple video series on this topic, but today we're going to cover how to do it quickly and on the go. Let's dive in. The first question that you want to answer is, do you have to be on camera with the subject that you're interviewing? Some channels, like the ones on the screen, they have the host and the guest sitting side by side, far enough apart so the microphones don't pick up each other's sound, and they just interview on the go like that. One camera, setup, easy, far away, wide lens, done. You may be that kind of creator. Or you may be filming a documentary on the go, and in which case you will need a different kind of setup. You want to make sure your subject is in the frame by themselves, talking to somebody off camera. So how do you set that up? The first thing is, the better you pack, the better you're prepared. If you're in a hurry, you probably only have one backpack worth of space to carry your camera, your lenses, and your sound equipment, and potentially a light if it fits. Basically prioritize those 4 elements, and in that order. You need a camera, obviously. You need one lens, sound equipment, and if you have any room left over, throw in a kicker light just to pick up a little bit extra in case you need it, depending on what environment you find yourself in. When you're setting up your camera, the only hard and fast rule is that your shutter speed has to be twice whatever your frame rate is. So if you're filming at 24 frames per second, you're going to have your shutter at 50. If you're filming at 30 frames per second, that shutter speed is going to be 60. It makes your footage look realistic, and it captures the motion blur without making it look fake or artificial. The rest of the camera settings will have to be adapted to the light situation that you're in. Unfortunately, if you don't have an entire studio with you, which I'm working on a follow-up video to this for studio interview setups, but if you don't have massive equipment, you're not going to be able to feed your camera the light that it might need. You're just going to have to work with what you've got. And that means you might have to up that ISO and adjust the aperture depending on your lens to suit the lighting situation that you have. At the end of the day, if it looks good, feels good, ship it. Second thing is, always follow the rule of thirds. When you're in a hurry, you don't often have time to be all production-y and perfect and artsy about your setup. You have 5 minutes or 10 minutes with an interview, and then you've got to move on. Maybe you've got multiple interviews. Maybe there's going to be crowds passing through in a hallway. Maybe there's a screening that you really want to catch after this interview, and both of you have things to do that you just don't have time to be set-decky and obsessing about costumes or the particular lighting situation, or, oh, well, let's wait for golden hour. No, we don't have that luxury all the time. So if you've got to run and gun and really move fast, just follow the basic rules of aesthetics and you'll be absolutely fine. What are those basic rules of aesthetics? I'm so glad you asked. First off, rule of thirds. Everybody's heard the rule of thirds. I'm going to have a video coming out on that more in depth, but basically, boom, boom, you slice your frame into thirds the long way, thirds the vertical way, and then you work within those frames to align your subject mathematically either on 1/3 of the frame or another third of the frame, and make sure that their eyes or their nose, preferably their eyes with a little bit of headroom on the top, their eyes are meeting at the top corner and the rest of the frame is filled out. Like, if you can frame the subject so that their eyes and their mouth or their eyes and their chin are on one side of the thirds, and then on the other side there's something aesthetically pleasing in the background, like a painting or a plant or a lamp or something, then you follow the rule of thirds. Your frame looks good to go. Let's just hit record and record the interview as we go. Once you figured out your space, your situation, make sure that you use the light to your advantage. I'll show you a few examples. Like here in this one, the light is coming in through the window. I don't have fancy ND filters, but I also don't want my subject to look blown out in harsh light. It was what it was, and I had to move quickly. So I sat her down. I made sure that the frame of the picture was aligned on the other rule of thirds. I made sure that the chair was just out of the way, but still there to give it some little visual interest instead of just having boring empty space there. That little corner is there deliberately. I left that in deliberately. I can't tell you how many times I adjusted that chair to put that there without letting it be fully in frame and making it look like an empty space. My subject was sitting in the sunlight but wasn't blinded by it. That was also like a considerate thing that I tried to do. And also, I didn't want her face to be full streaming in the light. So at least the shade, as far as it could come down, was somewhat diffusing the light on her face so that she looked fantastic. Even though there wasn't a shallow depth of field on the lens, you do still get a little bit of depth of field so that some stuff in the frame is out of focus, even though this was a wider lens, because that is what I had, and that was an adjustable lens, and that's what we got to do sometimes. I actually prefer when I'm out and about to use a wider lens because it puts the subject in the environment in which I'm shooting. Now, I'm going to talk in a future video about what I would do if I had a studio set up, and I have had interviews with multiple cameras before where I used a closer lens for the subject's face so that I could intercut. But if you have to choose one, my preference is always to lean into the wider lens because it puts the person in the environment in which they're shooting. This, for example, is a 2.8 f-stop 16-35 lens. This is actually the puppy that I use for a lot of the interviews that I do, and that it covers a lot of ground there. So I'm able to open up the aperture without having it be too far out of focus. I have to adapt to the light, so sometimes I can't use the full depth of field that I've got, but it is what it is. This lens is pretty good for when you're out and about, but this is an aesthetic choice. If you like, look at my face, if you like the 50-85 lens, the portrait lenses that make a person's face look really, really good, definitely lean into your personal style. Pack that lens instead of the other lens. The choice of lenses is up to you, especially when you're running gun, but I always like to have the wider one on me because you never know, as a documentary style person, you never know what you might capture, and maybe that 50 won't be doing you any favors if you're trying to get something else in the frame. So now you've framed your subject, you've kind of lit their subject. Let's talk a little bit more about lighting. This is the fastest way that I can think of lighting for you. Film the darker cheek, light the lighter cheek. If you imagine somebody being cut in the center, the light is on one side, the camera is on the other side. Film shadow side, it's always aesthetically pleasing. If you look at these examples here, you can see that even in the lower contrast of light, the camera looks better when it's on the shadow side of the person. It's a reoccurring theme in filmmaking, and it definitely suits your aesthetic look in interviews as well. Again, it's a personal choice, but that's what I always try to do. If you just remember that rule, it will help with your setup too. When you pack your backpack full of the gear that you need and you remember all these tips and tricks, you should be set up in about 5 to 10 minutes max. And that's what you need when you're on the road and on the go and in a very big hurry. I always bring the kicker just in case. I always have a tiny little light, a little tiny brick that I can put next to the person's face. Like in this situation here, I remember that the sun was coming in through the window and the best looking part of the entire space happened to be facing against the light, which means that my subject would have been blown out if I didn't have this particular kicker. Something as small as this, rechargeable with a little bit of color variation to it if you want to get stylistic, that always helps me as a run and gun on the go kind of filmmaker. That's another thing to keep in mind. Sometimes you won't need the light, and sometimes you will, and you'll always be happy that you have it. Let's talk about sound. For me, when you're a run and gun filmmaker, you could either have sound equipment that you have, a tiny little DJI recorder that's linked to your phone, something that's linked to the camera. People like to record sound to the camera, but sometimes if it's out of sync, it could ruin your footage, or you want separate footage for your camera so that you can have a backup in case something fails, and you want to keep that sound clean while recording, say, on your phone, using a crappy little microphone and a recording app on your phone to keep it, have the subject sync, and you're good to go. Or have an extra specific recorder, like I said, like the DJI. And then you can just have those sound files, multiple sound files, so you have multiple backups in case something sounds wrong, or you don't get the clean sound that you want on one. You can level it in post so that your subject can be heard. Pay attention to sound more than the video. People will forgive crappy video if the sound is good. And always remember that at the end of the day, you want the subject of your interview to be heard and to have their words valued. And if people can't hear what they're saying, or if it sounds garbled, or if it sounds messy, then nobody's going to stick around for the rest of the interview. And it's just going to be wasted. I always walk away with at least 2 sound files, and sometimes 3. Whereas I only walk away with 1 piece of footage for an interview. Now, I'm writing a little bit more about this in my Ko-fi page, and for those of you who don't know what that is, it's a page where a lot of the supporters are get blogs and extra behind the scenes content and advanced screening of videos for me. If you want to join and be one of these wonderful, beautiful people, then please hit the link below. But On top of considering all of these things about lenses and everything else, I want to give you another trick and tip to make sure that your interview looks great. When you have the person on 1/3, you have 2/3 of space left. So for right now, look, I'm sitting on this third and I'm speaking into this third. Or I'm sitting on this third and I'm speaking into this third. Always make sure that your subject is speaking into the empty space. Why? Watch what happens when I turn my head. This no longer makes sense. This is just showing an empty part of the room with clutter in the background. The setting is there, but the interviewer is talking to the person off camera in the other direction, and this situation just feels wrong. It feels like this person is trapped. It feels like they're talking off screen, like they have no direction, whereas this feels like it makes more sense. So if you're going to be on this side of the camera and you framed your person on one side or another, pay attention to the direction in which they are talking to you, or have them talk directly to the lens, which some people are uncomfortable to do. So I actually never ask people that I interview to talk down the barrel of the lens, because only the actors have familiarity with doing that. I'm talking into an empty glass space, and some people actually get intimidated by that. So I never put people on the spot like that. I'm always conducting the interview on the side of the camera. Wherever they're speaking into empty space, that's where I sit, so they have a comfortable eye line and we are just having a conversation. Now, in future videos, in the next video actually, I'm going to be talking about interview questions that you want to make sure you answer, and tips and tricks for how to conduct your interview so that you're not pulling things apart so tragically in post. There are certain tricks that I want you to know about so that when you sit down at the editing bay, you don't have to go through 2 hours of conversation wondering where the cuts should go. So if you want to check that out next, then please go ahead and click on the link on your screen, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.